Agreement. That's where we are, and again, I just say that for us. For President Biden. There's a deep sense of urgency in getting this done, and I also hear that. Throughout this country as well as throughout the region. It's the single best way. Not only to get the hostages home. To ease the suffering of people in Gaza. It's also the best way to make sure that conflict doesn't spread, that we don't see escalation, that we can actually diffuse some of the pressure points that we see throughout the region, and then open prospects for trying to build a more enduring peace and security for everyone throughout the Middle East. Happy to take some questions. Hello, Mr. Secretary. Just a few questions. With the new information that you just minister, Netanyahu accepting the original proposal. I just want to be very clear. There has been a long-standing disagreement between Hamas and Israel about permanent ceasefire versus temporary ceasefire. Could you confirm if Prime Minister has accepted the permanent ceasefire, which was what Hamas wanted? Did the Prime Minister assure you that Israel is not demands to the current framework in the coming days, and are you more hopeful now? After having this meeting with him? And one final thing, in your comments this morning, you said you referred to this latest round of talks. Maybe the last opportunity for a deal. Why did you say that now? Does that mean if this one fails, United States is going to give up on the ceasefire jobs? Thank you. Yeah, well, first to take the last part of the no, we're never giving up, but what we know is this: with every passing day, that there's not an agreement. Two things can happen. One is, of course, more hostages can perish, and second, intervening events come along. That may make things even more difficult, if not impossible, and we've experienced that throughout this process. So there's the fear's urgency of now. That's what I think we're all feeling. And we do see this as the best opportunity to finally get this over the finish line. But the challenge is, the longer this goes on, the more again hostages will suffer. And possibly perish, and the more other things happen. That could make things impossible. So that's why we're so intensely focused on getting this done, and getting it done now. On the first part of the question, the bridging proposal that Prime Minister Netanyahu has accepted, and we look to Hamas to accept, reflects what is in the ceasefire agreement that President Biden put before the world. Back in May. That's incorporated into a UN Security Council resolution. And that makes clear that this process will proceed in phases. A first initial ceasefire over the course of 6 weeks, in which hostages are released, prisoners are exchanged, and negotiations commenced on the conditions necessary for an enduring ceasefire. That's what the deal says. That's what's reflected in what was put before the world, and the world endorsed. Security Council endorsed, and the bridging proposal was to try to close some gaps, or to clarify different parts needed clarification. Now what the challenges, besides Hamas agreeing to the bridging proposal, is to make sure that there are clear understandings on how the different parties are going to make good on their commitments, how they're actually going to implement this agreement. And that's what so necessary and is. I don't want to at all minimize the challenge. These are complex issues. But it's also why we have expert negotiators who are working on this. I should have mentioned as well, Prime Minister Netanyahu committed to sending his senior expert team back to either Doha or to Egypt to try to complete this process. But we look to Hamas first and foremost to get behind the bridging proposal, and then to join everyone in trying to get a clear understanding on how the commitments will be implemented. Channel. Thank you. Secretary Lincoln. Thank you. Let's talk about Hamas. You have just mentioned them. So you've put, the final proposal in Doha on Friday. Israel has accepted this, Hamas has declined. Is there a real way, to move forward? What is your message to Hamas? And if I may ask you, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said he has insisted on an Israeli presence on the Philadelphia corridor. Is it an obstacle to reach an agreement, and what have you told him when you have both of you met earlier today? Thank you. So what I would say and to his leadership is, if it genuinely cares about the Palestinian people that it purports to somehow represent, then it will say yes to this agreement, and it will work on clear understandings about how to implement it. Because the single quickest, best, most effective way to relieve the terrible suffering of the Palestinians that was instigated by Hamas attack on October 7th and the war that ensued is to complete this agreement. So that's really the question. Is its leadership actually looking out for Palestinian children, women and men who are suffering at this very moment in Gaza? And if it is, it will agree. And then we'll work on making sure that there's clarity on all sides about how the agreement will be implemented, how they're going to make good on their commitments. Because not everything is spelled out in detail in the agreement. And I can't comment on specific issues that remain. But as I said, there are questions of implementation, and making sure that it's clearly understood what each side its commitments. That's the next step, assuming Hamas agrees to the bridging proposal. Mr. Secretary, calling up on my colleague's question. Yes, or no? Have you gotten any indications from Hamas since the talks wrapped last week that they recognize the urgency of the deal on the table and that this could be the last chance? And in your meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, did you raise the escalating settler violence that we're seeing in the West Bank? The EU has suggested they would be open to sanctioning sitting Israeli officials. Is the US open to doing the same? And then, if I may, be the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza. I know you say ceasefire is the best way to bring that to an end, but in the time that the war and the negotiations have been going on, officials in the Gaza Strip say 40,000 people have died. Polio has now re-emerged. It's been gone through over 2 decades. What is the US prepared to do to ensure that the humanitarian situation is alleviated in the time that the negotiations are still going on? So, let me take the last part. First, because I spent some time today on, as I always do, on the humanitarian situation, both specifically, for example, about polio, because we very much share the concern about the possibility of its re-emergence, and we've been working on a detailed plan to make sure that those who need to be vaccinated against it can get vaccinated, and we're working with the Israeli government on that. And I believe that we'll be able to move forward with a plan to do that. In the coming weeks. It is urgent, it is vital. More broadly, there are very, very important issues that continue to need to be people to get the assistance they desperately need, whether it's food, whether it's medicine, whether it's appropriate shelter, whether it's dealing with things like treating the sewage that's accumulated throughout Gaza and that promotes an acute that presents an acute health hazard. That's an incubator for disease. All of that was very much on my agenda today. I had a detailed discussion with the defense minister, with the head of the military on steps that need to be taken, must be taken, to continue to try to improve the situation for Palestinians in Gaza. Now again, the quickest way to do that, in the most robust way possible, would be through the ceasefire, because that opens up much more space to surge assistance into people and then to build something that's genuinely sustainable. But even in the absence of a ceasefire, this is an absolute imperative. Heard from Hamas. So obviously we don't hear directly from Hamas, but both Egypt and Qatar are in contact with Hamas. And, look. I don't want to, go beyond anything we've already said except to say that tomorrow. When I see the leaders of both Egypt and latest from them on what they are hearing. And, I can't, speculate on exactly what Asa's intentions are. We've seen public statements before, where, that don't fully reflect. Where said the critical, next step is for Hamas to accept the bridging proposal that Israel had, or Prime Minister Netanyahu is now accepted minister, then, to engage with, everyone else on making sure that, we have clear understandings of how each party would actually implement the commitments that its agreement. So, probably more tomorrow after, we talk to our friends in Egypt, in Qatar, and I'm sorry there was a third-party question. Yes it did. It did, and, this has been also something that's been, a deep and ongoing concern. For us. Violence. Intimidation, as well of, the Palestinian community in the West Bank. There was an incident that I think has galvanized attention from the Israeli government, and that is critical. And we look action taken to prevent this kind of violence. Action taken to hold people who responsible for it accountable. And government to take the necessary steps to stop the violence and to make sure that there is real deterrence in place so that it doesn't happen again. Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thank you. All right. So that was State Secretary Antony